Hey, what's up YouTube? This is tcgsam here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the new decks that get support in BLZD Dominion and how I think they'll rank in our current metagame. Now keep in mind, I'm not going to be talking about decks that we already have because with the potential of a ban list right around the corner, I figured there's really no point in doing that until after we get it. So in this video, I'll only be talking about the new decks from BLZD Dominion, but without any further ado, let's hop straight into it, starting off with the first deck. That's going to be Archfiend. The new cards they get are like a quick play spell and a ritual monster. The quick spell is fine, it gets them access to a trap card, thus it acts as a ritual spell, which can be kind of cool, and then the ritual monsters have interruption effects when they're summoned. I don't think that the support ultimately pushes Archfiend any further than it already was, and I think it was already sort of like maybe top of experimental, bad, maybe bottom of rogue tier. I believe it maybe has had like one or two regional results, so for that reason I'll put it in the rogue category, and the new support, it doesn't really fix the issues with this deck, like the fact that its power level just isn't super high, and it's just a little bit clunky with all those moving pieces. On the other hand, I think Artmage is something that is a potential meta contender. The Artmage deck is getting new Artmage cards in the set, but also they're inherently getting support through like the power patron stuff. So essentially all the Medius archetypes, DoomZ, Artmage, and Elfnote are getting some sort of power patron monster, and there are a bunch of new power patron cards that sort of synergize with like all the Medius archetypes. I think this does push Artmage to like maybe the very bottom of potential meta contender. This is a deck that was already pretty scary when it was able to go first and set up its entire board. It gets new extenders in the new Power Patron and Artmage cards as well, which of course will make the deck even better. So for that reason, I'll probably put it at like potential meta contender. I think this deck could be really good. There are a few issues with the deck still, of course. This deck is sort of reliant on its field spell going through, so it makes it pretty vulnerable to interruption when going second. It's not the best into certain hand traps like Drone Lockbird at times. And personally, out of all like the Medius decks, I actually think Artmage is probably the worst one. I think the other two are a little bit better. But even despite all that, as a combo deck, Artmage is definitely fine. It's very scary if it is able to go first, and it can take advantage of that new power patron support that we're getting in this set. Next up, we got Assault Mode. I think they're getting like two new cards, one new boss monster, and then one new main deck monster. But similar to Archfiend, this doesn't really solve the issue that our Assault Mode had, which was just its game plan is just inherently not good enough in today's metagame. Yes, they got cards like a few sets ago that were actually pretty solid, but unfortunately, it is for Assault Mode, so I don't think the deck is able to take that good support and really have it be much better. So for now, it just goes into the experimental category. Clown Clan, I think, is in an interesting spot. I've heard people say that this deck is pretty good, and I've heard other people say that this deck only really becomes good once we get the new support in the next set. And personally, after reading the cards, I'm in the camp that, yeah, this deck has potential, but it's not going to be really good at the moment. The way this deck plays is like, they actually focus on like tribute summoning guys, and their monsters get all like interruption effects when they're tributed. Just inherently playing a tribute deck is kind of problematic, especially if you're trying to play at a competitive level. But at least with this archetype, they are getting new support that we know of in the future that's going to be really good. So I won't say this deck's like bad by any means, but at least at the moment with the current wave of support, it probably just goes into the experimental tier. Maybe someone can make something work with it, but ultimately I think its game plan right now is a little bit too slow and not good enough to compete with the metagame. Next up, we got DoomZ. And DoomZ is actually a deck that I've personally been looking into quite a bit and I like a lot. It's a deck that can play a lot of one-card starters. It's a deck whose engine is pretty inherently good at going second. Their cards are pretty resistant to being to destruction-based removal. They all have effects that trigger when they're destroyed. And also their engine inherently lets them go second pretty well because they pop cards at the same time while doing their combo. So inherently breaks boards while establishing their own plays. I think ultimately I'll have to put this like maybe at the very top of potential meta contender, maybe bottom meta contender. The reason being, while this deck does have all the strengths that I just mentioned, it is a deck that has a few flaws as well. I think its biggest issue is that it is a deck that can be very vulnerable to board breakers because its end board basically just sets up all in the monster zone with like one trap card that acts as sort of a mistaken arrest, which is definitely a really strong board, don't get me wrong. But it is the type of board that could potentially lose pretty hard to board breakers if that ever becomes pretty popular in the metagame. So the thing with DoomZ is like, it kind of is a meta call. In certain metagames, I'm sure it'll be great when no one's really playing those board breakers. And in metagames where like destruction-based removal is really good, I'm sure DoomZ will be great. In general, I think this deck has pretty good matchups into the expected best decks of the format like Kewl Tune because it has so many ways to remove bodies off the board. I would say overall, this deck is definitely incredibly strong. I would expect this deck to be one of the best decks coming out of BLZD Dominion. For the next deck we're going to talk about, that's going to be Earth Machine. There are many different ways to play this deck. You can play it as like an OTK, like rank 10 trains deck, or you can play it as like a going first mid-range / control deck. I think overall both are okay for the deck. Even before it got its new support, I think it was in an okay spot. It's seen a few regional results here or there throughout the years, but ultimately, I think I can't really put it any higher than Rogue. Like, the cards are not bad by any means, but ultimately this deck just has so many moving pieces that, and ultimately its power level just isn't as high as some of the other meta decks that we have in the format right now, so I'm not too sure it can really keep up with the current meta game. Overall though, I think something nice about this deck, like I said though, it is one of those like toolboxy style decks that can play like well going second, it can play well going first, so maybe there's some potential there. Next up we got Elfnote. I also think Elfnote is something with strong potential to become meta deck. I would say it's sort of like in between DoomZ and Artmage. I believe Elfnote also gets a new card that can sort of act as a hand trap and interrupt your opponent turn 0. So that's pretty nice for the deck to have a built-in searchable hand trap that they can use turn 0. Some decks that have had those have historically been pretty good, so I wouldn't be surprised if Elfnote becomes incredibly strong as well. Even before the new support, similar to Artmage, this was a super scary combo deck when going first, but I think Elfnote did it a little bit better than Artmage. They have great ways to bridge into, let's say, like the Thiefsmith engine, for example, and that can significantly raise the consistency and power level of the deck. It's also a flexible enough deck where there aren't really any like significant locks on these cards, and it doesn't like shoehorn you into like one very specific style of play compared to something like Artmage or DoomZ, which have almost like set in stone game plans. So I'll say Elfnote does have that little bit of extra flexibility above the other two, but sort of like with the other two decks, there are weaknesses with this deck as well. It is a deck I would say that is pretty susceptible to common hand traps, but then again, a lot of these decks are going to have those issues. Alright, next up we got Enneacraft. Enneacraft's new support was okay. I wouldn't say the new support was crazy good by any means, and because the new support isn't that good and the deck wasn't doing too much to begin with, it probably just has to go to the top of experimental tier. I don't think this deck is terrible by any means, but I think that in our upcoming metagame, it's just not going to be good enough to compete with the best decks that we have, and the new support that it's getting from this set isn't enough to really help push it over the edge. Next up, we got Fairy Tail. I don't know that much about this deck, actually, but from what I know, it seems like a deck that's able to spam out a bunch of bodies and make, like, rank 4s. Some of the old Fairy Tail cards are not bad by any means, like, they have good consistency in a card like Fairy Tail Luna. If they ever get Fairy Tail Snow back, that could be something else that helps the deck as well. They are spellcasters, which maybe means you can play something like Secret Village of the Spellcasters. But overall, I think that since I don't know too much about this deck, I can't really put it any higher than like experimental or rogue tier. And then next up, we got the big one. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that this deck is going to be a strong meta contender right away, especially if we get a ban list that hits all the old decks. But even if we don't, Kewl Tune is definitely going to slot into our metagame right away. The new cards are incredibly crazy for the deck, giving them access to full hand knowledge. Basically, when you play the Kewl Tune deck and you get to resolve your combo, you're not really playing a game anymore. You're just solving a puzzle because you know exactly what pieces your opponent has, and you'll know exactly where to stop them. And basically at that point, like I said, it becomes a puzzle. Your opponent doesn't really have any agency in the game that you're playing. And I think that definitely makes the deck incredibly unfair and sometimes unfun to play against. But regardless, there's no doubt that this deck will definitely become a top tier contender. Not to mention it can take full advantage of cards like Vidralis Harmonia as well, which is definitely going to be one of the best hand traps in the game. Next up, we got Predaplant. I think Predaplant is actually a little bit underrated. I haven't really seen anyone talk too much about this deck, but from seeing what this deck can do, it's one of those combo decks that can pop off a surprising amount and has a surprising amount of decent extenders too. With a new support, they can start adding cards like Instant Fusion, which is a 1-card starter for the deck that turns into like a whole end board. This deck can take full advantage of the new cards like Apex Polymerization, using it as an extender or as a super strong board breaker going second. Same with Super Poly. This is one of the OG decks that can take full advantage of Super Polymerization because they have so many ways to turn your opponent's monsters into the right types and attributes. I'll say ultimately, I would probably put Predaplant like maybe at the very bottom of a potential meta contender. Definitely worse than like these 3 decks, but I'll say it's better than all the decks in the Rogue tier. This is definitely a deck I feel like that has a ton of potential. My only concern with it is like it does seem like it has a very heavy engine requirement, and it does seem like it has to play a couple of different bricks, but the new support that it's getting from BLZD Dominion definitely makes this deck a lot better than it originally was. They generically get cards like a Plant Circular. Basically, they can send a Predaplant guy from the deck to the grave, summon it from hand. That Predaplant guy gets to search a starter, which is honestly crazy without even taking up your normal summon, which doesn't even take up your normal summon. They got to play cards like Dominus Spark and Dominus Impulse, which are some of the best hand traps that we have in the game. This deck has the tools to go first instead of a big combo board. This deck has tools going second. But ultimately, because this deck I think is going to have to play very heavy engine, and it is one of those decks that has a ton of moving pieces, and not to mention its susceptibility to like common hand traps like Fua, I think. Ultimately, I can't put this deck any higher, but I think this deck is something that's definitely really underrated. Next up, we got Rokket. They get a new Link 2, which is honestly pretty good. This new Link 2 gets some extra consistency, but ultimately, I don't think that really pushes Rokket past like the Rogue tier. Their support from Burst Protocol wasn't bad by any means, but again, the deck hasn't really been doing anything. And I think that until it gets its next wave of support, it probably isn't going to be doing too much either at the moment. Maybe there's some potential with like Dragon Link, but again, I don't think this deck is going to be any better than Rogue tier. Not terrible by any means, but nothing that's going to impact the metagame too much in my opinion. Next up, we got Mimighoul. Mimighoul does get one new flip monster, which I believe gives them a search when it's flipped up. So extra consistency for the deck is never bad. While I think the old Mimighoul cards are already pretty solid and pretty good, I don't think this new card fundamentally changes the viability of Mimighoul. It's probably just in Rogue tier. It's a playable deck. It has some unfair elements like you can lock your opponent out of normal summoning with their field spell. This deck is fairly consistent. You can splash in other level 1 engines like Yummy to make it better. But overall, I don't think this viability of the deck changes with the new support that we're getting. And finally, Hecahands. I would say Hecahands is probably not a very good deck. It already was pretty terrible to begin with, and with the new support, it doesn't make the deck any better. Its new support doesn't really make the deck any better than it currently was, and it definitely won't be enough in my opinion to make it good. So unfortunately, it's going to have to go into the bottom tier. So that's going to do it for my best new decks from Blazing Dominion tier list video. Let me know what you guys thought about in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree? Do you feel like any of these decks are better or worse than what I said? Let me know in the comments below. I also want to give a quick shout out to Card Trader. You can check them out using my affiliate link in the description below and use code tcgsam for 5% off your entire order while helping to support the channel. But with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.